Hello and welcome to the Freakish Lemon video podcast. I'm your host, the Freakish Lemon. I go by Adrian and I use masculine pronouns. Welcome to any new viewers. Thank you so much for clicking on whatever you clicked on to get here. And welcome back, any returning viewers. Thanks for following along with this thing that I do. This is a crafty type podcast coming to you from the Northwest Hills of Connecticut. And show notes for this episode and all other episodes can be found at freakishlemon.com or freakishlemonpodcast.com. They go to the same place. We do have a group on Ravelry. Just search Freakish Lemon in the Groups tab and you will find us. And you can find me at all the fun places as Freakish Lemon, like Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, or Ravelry. All the links to these things will be in the down bar here on YouTube or around here if you're watching this somewhere else. And if you are here on YouTube and you want to follow along with this thing that I do, consider hitting that subscribe button so that you know when I post a new video. Show notes over to the side, gotta scroll them down. Okay, here we go. Oh, it's been a few weeks. So we're gonna start this episode out with podcast stuff. The 2018 blanket make-along is still going strong. There's been some folks who have finished some blankets recently over in that thread, so go check it out on the Ravelry group, and anybody can join. It's any craft, any point in progress of the blanket. You could be in the planning stages and you can come participate. It's great to get some encouragement or get some opinions on something that you might have questions about, that kind of stuff. It's a great little group working on blankets. We also have a quilt-along in the works. It's the half-square triangle quilt-along. There's also a thread for this in the Ravelry group. It's running until the end of September, so there's plenty of time. Come check it out if you want to see what folks are doing. It's a pretty small bunch of us. I know the audience is kind of built up of knitters, but there's a couple of people interested in quilting, so come join me over there if you want. And the last thing about the podcast, I'm gonna be changing the schedule a little bit on this podcast based on this episode and the previous episode. I'm gonna go back to doing monthly episodes for a while because right now the crafts that I'm doing first and foremost require a lot of planning, so I may have worked on things a lot in 2 weeks, but I don't necessarily have anything to show for it. An example of that will be one of the sweater projects I'm talking about coming up in works in progress. But a month gives me plenty of time to get stuff sorted. It's less pressure to have things to talk about, and it gives me some breathing room from all the production side of things. Why are you mowing your lawn? This neighbor across the street, the grass on his lawn is only ever this tall. I don't know why he needs to mow it constantly. Hopefully that's not too distracting. I'm hoping maybe I'll just close the window. It's already deadly in here. I am filming this kind of early in the morning on a Saturday, which is why the sunlight is so strong. I have an east-facing bedroom, so there's nothing I can do about this glare, and it might affect the color of some of the things I'm going to show you. But anyway, podcast schedule. I'm going to go monthly for a while, just to ease up on some of that pressure to have things ready every 2 weeks. We'll see how it goes. So, life stuff, I don't really have much for life stuff, just a quick hand update. I did see the orthopedic doctor again about my hands. He sent me to an occupational therapist. I've been doing that for a couple of weeks now. There is some improvement in my hands, but not enough. So likely I do have a follow-up with the orthopedic doctor coming up soon, but if that's not going anywhere, the occupational therapist has recommended that I go see specifically a hand surgeon to get their opinion on what's going on because my EMG came back negative, so there's no obvious signs pointing it to carpal tunnel, but One of those things. Medical stuff is so terrible. But there has been some improvement. I've mostly been doing nerve stretches and hand strengthening exercises, which has helped, likely because I've spent so long not doing any rigorous activity with my hands in any way. So probably there was weakness there that was contributing, because I've been resting my hands since the end of August, basically. But yeah, if you're curious, the hand stretches I'm doing that one where you kind of put your hand up all the way out there and stretch this way, to stretch the nerve for these fingers. And then the ulnar nerve, I think that's the one for these fingers. This is a weird stretch, but you basically go up to a wall, put your hand flat on the wall with your thumb facing up, and then like turn your body the other way. It's a very strange stretch, but the stretches have been helping, and the hand strengthening exercise, it takes a lot. The pain doesn't come up as quickly. It's a slower build to the pain, especially at work, so that's helping. But the human body, what a fragile meat sack. Anyway, that's really the only life stuff I've got going on. Has mostly been chilling out, trying not to die when the weather decides to be way too hot for no reason all of a sudden. Which is why the hair got chopped off, which I've been meaning to do for weeks. It was getting really shaggy, as you could see from the previous episode. But anyway, let's get on to the crafting stuff, because that's really what we're here to talk about. I have a bunch of FOs. Some good, some bad, some a learning experience. So, first thing I want to show you is, my sample tablet weaving band. This is the pattern from the Candace Crockett book, Card Weaving. I've talked about it once before, I think, but it's woven with kind of tensioned between me wrapped around the belt and whatever I can hook the other end onto, and the cards that are warped change the shed. There's a lot more information on it online if you're interested. I'm not explaining it very well, and I don't have anything warped up to demonstrate, but this is the sample weaving band. This is actually the side I started on, which is why it's so lumpy bumpy. Oh, come on, focus. Yeah, that's a pretty beginner start there. You can see as it goes through, like, it didn't get the sheds tensioned right or something, because like some of the warps just kind of skip all over the place. And I think I've talked about this once before, but part of my problem, I think, is I used 2 smooth wool yarns and 1 grippy wool yarn. So this white is leftovers from a mini skein from the Cookies and Milk set from No Makers that I bought ages ago. This kind of goldeny green color is Northbound Knitting Lichen, and the black is Knit Picks Palette and the Fingering Weight, and the Knit Picks Palette is really grippy. So anytime, this is not wide enough to me, let me just get out of the way. So the camera wants to focus on my face, but this is not wide enough to block my face. So there we go. That didn't really help either. But anyway, so you can see I got a little bit more sorted out at the end. It's one of those practice makes perfect things. So this is just a foot and some change, maybe a foot and 8 inches, or not a foot, a yard and 8 inches of a sample band. I'm debating whether or not to buy a little card weaving like loom so that I can tension the warp threads more easily, or if I'm gonna stick with the backstrapping method where I hook it onto something and I provide the tension. But I think what I'm going to do is get some cotton yarn that's not going to stretch as much as wool and try the backstrapping method with that again and see how that goes. I think once I get some more experience with this kind of weaving, then I'll know whether I should invest in a kind of tablet weaving loom to tension or continue the backstrapping method. But great learning experience, and was pretty easy to pick up and go with. I don't know how to sort out the twist in this, which is kind of generated by which direction you're turning the cards in. I don't know if that's something that I can, like, I don't know, steam block out. I did wet block this, but I mean, I didn't, like, stretch it out or anything. I don't know. I'll play with it. This will be my experimental one. So finished that, and I finished, officially finished my Tramontane sweater, which looks like this. However, I tried this on last night, and I posted about it on Instagram. It does not fit. It does not fit. It's like if somebody took a sweater that would fit me and taffy pulled it. If I put it on so that the shoulders fit, the hem is like mid-thigh, and the underarm goes down to like here, which is not great. To get the bottom to fit, I have to pull it up, and the shoulders have to be up here, and then the underarm fits. It's very, very strange, but remember that this was the second sweater that I put on this machine using, and the first sweater I did on the machine was from a machine knitting sweater class. And I've learned a lot more about machine knitting since then. I think the entire problem stems from my swatch, which was this. It's not in pattern, and this is not big enough to get an accurate gauge from to machine knit a sweater. So I'm gonna be frogging this sweater, which only pains me because of how long the ribbing takes. So here's my plan. I'm gonna frog the sweater, reclaim the yarn, wash it, get the kinks out, set it, ball it back up, or cake it back up, knit a proper machine knitting swatch, knit probably 2 or 3 machine knitting swatches, the 40 stitches by 40 rows with the markers so that I can measure a decent size. I'm gonna go at a looser gauge because this thing is like iron. When I pull it so that the underarms fit, the shoulders stay up. That's not good. I didn't know. This was not indicative of the fabric that I was actually going to get. So, swatch a few more times, get my gauge. I'm going to draft my sweater pattern from the Sally Melville Knitting Essentials book. For a couple of reasons. One, I already own the book, and I have to do all the math anyway. This pattern, the Tramontane sweater, is from Amy Herzog, and I used her custom fit site, but this was not a good swatch. and I paid $10 for the pattern. So I want to make sure that I can get the sweater gauge I need and sort out a hand knitting pattern prior to paying for another custom fit pattern or subscribing to the custom fit website. The other sweater pattern that I've used, the Sweater Blank by Renee Callahan, came with the Craftsy class that I bought, and it's a very forgiving sweater. It's a drop shoulder sweater. You just kind of got to get how wide do you want it, how long do you want it, and then you're good to go, basically, with some more math. But doing a set-in sleeve sweater, there's a lot more variables. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to draft my pattern from the Sally Melville Knitting Essentials book, which is a fantastic resource, and when I was reading it, it seemed very clear. We'll find out if my math makes it very clear, but I want to get better at figuring out the right fabric and then knowing more about the construction of the sweater. And the second reason I'm using Sally Melville's book to draft is she doesn't do curves for set-in sleeves. She does straight lines, which makes seaming a lot easier. When I put this on, this portion of the seam right around the top curve seemed so bulky. So much more bulkier, wow. Seemed bulkier than the rest of the seaming. And I don't know why that is. So, if I can get a sweater that fits, with the right gauge, with straight line seams, then I'll be more confident going back to something like custom fit where there's curves on the set-in sleeves to do subsequent patterns. So, I have a beautiful sweater, and it would probably make a great sweater dress for Gabby. But I want this sweater. I can't just keep making sweaters that don't fit me and giving them to Gabby. Which is what I did with the first sweater I ever knit. Because it was just way too small. Except in, like, arm length. So sad. But honestly, the stockinette portion is not hard to knit on the knitting machine. It's just the ribbing. And I think I'm going to swatch for doing that tuck ribbing where I ladder up every other stitch instead. And probably won't do as much knitting. This pattern called for a lot of ribbing on the sleeves, which took a while, so maybe like half that amount. We'll see. But that's the plan, is to frog it, swatch properly. That's not even in pattern. And start again. Which stinks. But I have some other finished objects that make me a lot more comfortable with the idea of drafting my pattern. So I made this project in a single day. This is a cowl neck poncho. It's based on one that Bren Boone of Snurb Yarn drafted up for herself. She also has a knitting machine, and she wanted to get some lace weight hand spun knit up into a poncho, but she didn't want to hand knit that much stockinette stitch. So she drew out a schematic, and she shared this schematic with a Facebook group, I believe. I think that's where it's... I saw this project on the Little Bean Loves Crochet podcast. It's Kayleen, right? I'm terrible with names. Oh my god, I should have written this down. Terrible. But she shared the schematic with me because she was part of that Facebook group. And she recently got an LK150 and made one in fingering weight yarn. And I had all this leftover DK weight yarn from my, my yarn crawl sweater. Then I took all the leftover DK weight yarns and some other skeins that I have, and I made a cowl neck poncho. There's the neck, which looks huge on its own. This is really blown out. But it's basically 2 stockinette rectangles seamed together. Yep, so there's a big stockinette rectangle, which is, I believe, 60 inches wide. So this was from a kit that I won at a prize on the Western Connecticut Yarn Crawl in September. And this purple is a lovely DK from Mars, Hey Brownberry, who has the Dynamics Yarns company with her daughter. She had sent me this beautiful skein of like a grayish purple yarn, which I thought went really well with all the leftovers from my sweater. So every other yarn, all the other yarns, are leftover sweater yarns that you've seen on this podcast before. Basically grays and blacks. And then I had to do the cowl neck a little differently, because the schematic says to pick up the stitches and knit up, but I needed like 15 more stitches on my needle bed in order to make that happen. So I said, nope, we're not gonna finagle that. So I just cast on what I needed for the short edge, knit a long rectangle, and seamed it up. I did basically a 3 needle bind off using the figure 8 cast off. I think that's what it's called. I didn't do the best job, and you can see that my stitches kind of show through onto the right side, but that's fine. So I basically knit this poncho for wet spring mornings when I take the dog out at 5 o'clock in the morning, which I did sling this on every time I took the dog out for like 3 weeks because it was still cold in the morning and wet. And wool is great for not feeling like the damp is seeping into your bones. So that was a great success. I do like how this fits. It's bigger than I thought it would be, but I think the weight of the DK kind of pulls it to be bigger than expected. And I just used my sweater as a gauge swatch since it was all the same yarns. And doing the math wasn't that hard for me, and it worked out, so confident there. And then I also did the tuck stitch hat that I talked about last week, a couple weeks ago, when I had one of those. I had a big long swatch with a bunch of different patterns on it, and I had an alternating tuck stitch pattern. So I tried to use that as a swatch, realized very quickly that I was not getting the gauge I needed on the yarns I was trying, because they were not exactly the same gauge as the swatch that I used with scrap yarn. So I did the proper thing, and I swatched with the yarn I was going to use. This is 100 Ravens yarn. What is the base? Epona is the base, and this is the Draco colorway. So I did a proper swatch, 40 stitches by 40 rows. As you can see, tuck stitch is kind of short and wide. And the front-facing side is the purl side. Because this is the side that's normally the right side. You can see through it. You can see my neck. Okay. This is normally the side that would be the front side, since it's the stockinette side, but this is actually... I mean, you could make this the right side. I think if you had enough tucks and your yarn was less variegated, that would be an interesting pattern. So I did the swatch, I did the math, and I successfully created a hat, which looks tiny, but I swear it's not. So I did a mock rib pulling every other needle out of work. I did go down a dial number, which I will not do in the future because you have to really kind of pull it taut to get it over my head. This looks ridiculous since my hair is short again, but as you can see, it fits my head. It's just, and this is fine like around my head, it's just the widest point of my head. I have to like pull it all the way out. And then there's the tuck stitch pattern, which I think turned out really good for this variegated yarn. And then I did my decreases. I did my decreases at 4 points and did a, what is that decrease called? Center double decrease. It's harder to tell because it is, the right side is the purl side, but that's actually a really good fit for my head, that kind of square decreasing. So I decreased 8 stitches every round, but it was at 4 points in the hat, which made it easier to find my decreases as I went, and also less chance of me dropping stitches because I used my garter bar to do the decreasing. So when you're decreasing on a knitting machine, you'll put, you know, one stitch over the other, but then you have a hole. So you have to move, you have to get all the stitches next to each other, which you can do with the transfer tools, but the biggest transfer tool that comes with the machine is a 3-prong. So 3 stitches at a time, moving them over, wasn't gonna do it. So I took my garter bar, pulled the knitting off the machine onto the garter bar, removed the amount of needles that I needed to from each side, and then put the knitting back on. It made the decreasing so much faster. It was brilliant. So I'm really pleased at how this turned out, and I'm gonna make another one. This one hasn't been blocked yet. You can see this. My ends are not trimmed, but I'm gonna block this one, and I wanna do another one like this in a less variegated colorway to see how the tuck stitch behaves. And I'm going to actually use this yarn from Once Upon a Corgi. It's a Series of Unfortunate Events club colorway. It's Snow Scout. And it's still a variegated yarn, but it's a softer variegation than just green and black, which I think will be interesting. And I also want to see how the tuck stitches behave when you hold 2 strands together. I think that will look really cool, especially in something like this where it's a lighter, more delicate color. And frankly, I don't know what else to do with this because I'm terrified of getting things dirty because I always get stuff on me. Always. So I think a hat would be a good idea for this. Less chance of me, you know, walking against a wet painted wall or something. Which is kind of, yeah. So that's going to be my next hat project, and I'll probably do this relatively quickly. It's a pretty quick process from swatch to hat, especially now that I've done it. And I took the measurements for this hat from a hand-knitted hat that I made that fit me really well. So I just measured out, you know, how wide it was, how tall the brim was, how tall it was from the bottom edge to the decrease line, that kind of thing. So, and there's the seam in the back, which actually looks kind of neat. So that's cool. And then, one more finished object. I completed a shawl for my Shawl Shapes design project, which is kind of going really slowly, but it's fine. I don't need 50 million shawls all at once. This is a worsted weight triangular shawl. The colors are all blown out. It's darker than this. Let me see if we can get... This is true to color, right here. That's true to color. So this is what I'm calling my half and half triangular shawl. As I said, it's worsted weight. I did this on my LK 150. at a dial tension of 8 and the tension rod tension of 7, which I'm also taking into account now that I've learned a lot more about machine knitting. And the body of the shawl is in Knitology Groovy. It's their worsted weight base. And the I-cord bind off is in Plymouth Galway worsted in a black. And this shawl was actually knit in 2 pieces and seamed down the middle, which is why I'm calling it my half and half shawl. I'm going to be doing a fingering weight version of this shawl once I get the pattern typed up to test it, and it'll be 2 different colorways on either side, which I think will be neat. So there is the seam. I did do the seaming for this on a machine because I didn't want to bother with this tiny curled edge doing the hand seaming. And for this I picked up 3 stitches for every 4 rows, so I mean, I've heard that's a good ratio for rows to stitches, but it worked out pretty well. And this is a pretty big shawl for what seems to be a small bed on the knitting machine. Like, this is past my wingspan. I stretch my arms all the way out. This is how much wing I have left. And if I put this on, the point comes down to my jeans. So it's a pretty big shawl, and I didn't even go the full 150 stitches. I think I did 144 stitches. So I could have gone a few more. But I'm very pleased with how this turned out. It took me a while to get the shape right because on those little shawl swatches, I completely neglected to write down exactly what I did. So it took a bunch of trial and error, but I've got it sorted out now. And I can't wait to cast on the other one. I can't wait to cast on the other one, because those 2 are yarns that I've been waiting to use for ages. I got them at Stitches Midwest, and I'm very excited about it. But that's the end of my finished objects. Lots of finished objects, just kind of completed all at once. Oh, and I did this in a day. I did this in about 10 hours, once I got the shape right. Once I knew which way I was supposed to be going, it took me about 10 hours to do this, which is not too shabby for a shawl. I'm telling you guys, machine knitting is freaking great. So let's talk about some works in progress. The first work in progress I want to talk about is a scarf that I've got on my rigid heddle loom. I have a shocked 10-inch Cricut loom. I'm using a 12 dent heddle because I really like using fingering weight yarns for weaving. I think I talked about this last episode. Maybe not. I don't remember. But it's warped in a stripe pattern using 2 blue colored yarns and 1 red colored yarn. And I'm doing a plain weave using the hand spun that I call the Last Son of Krypton. I'm nearing the end. I think I've got about a foot to go, which will be great. And then I'll hem stitch the end, and I think I will twist the fringe, which will look really nice, I think. And then my next work in progress. This is not really a work in progress. It's just kind of a thing that I'm trying. It's a quilting project. It's not really a project. I don't know how to explain it. But I look up a lot of quilting things on Pinterest just for ideas of stuff. And one thing I'm always looking for is ways to use up scraps, because I have a lot of fabric stash. And I intend to do more quilts, but you get these pieces that you know are good for something, but but you're just blocked on how to use them because you're so used to seeing this fabric all the time. So one of the things that I found on Pinterest that looked like a really good idea, because it used two different types of scraps, were these quilted strips. So what they are is you take a cutoff of batting, like when you trim your quilt, you have these pieces of batting, and you just quilt down strips to them. So let's see, you'd start at this end, you just do a 1/4 inch seam here, flatten it out, and then you'd line up the next piece of fabric, right sides together, raw edges, do your 1/4 inch seam, press that out flat, and just keep going until you get to the end of the strip and then trim it off. So I now have a bunch of these strips that are just scrap batting and scrap fabrics just arranged in these little strips. And these would be good for, I mean, ultimately what I'll probably end up doing is I'll probably end up combining them into a big quilt and then just putting the backing on and doing some really basic quilting on it since it's already pretty much quilted. Or it would be good as like a detail piece. Like if I was to make, I don't know, a project bag or something, and I could just like do this strip, oh, why am I out of focus now? Like do one of these strips down the middle and quilt the rest of the bag. Like that would be really cool. So I have a lot of very small strips of fabric, and I have a lot of very small strips of batting that I've been trying to use up, but you always end up with more scraps. That's just the nature of the game. So at least this way, there's kind of a plan for them. They're not just sitting around stressing me out. But another thing I saw on Pinterest, which I'm going to start doing too once I use up a lot of my scrap batting, is to take receipt tape or like adding machine tape and kind of use that to paper piece long strips like that, which you could use all over the place. So I do have more strips here, but they're kind of all in the similar color family. I want to wait until I have some more scraps, and like these are small scraps, like this strip. Perfectly good strip, but you have a bunch of these and you're like, what do I do with this? So that's what I'm doing with those. That's kind of an ongoing thing, but I wanted to talk about it in case anybody else needed some ideas about what to do with their fabric pieces and scrap batting, especially the scrap batting. The scrap batting takes up so much space, but you don't want to just throw away perfectly good batting, and there's only so many coasters and mug rugs you can make. I've also, because of doing these hand strengthening exercises and nerve stretches, I decided to try to do a little bit of crocheting. Now it's not much, but it's felt really good to be doing some crocheting. So I've been working on this marled granny stripe blanket. Stop falling asleep. Show notes. This is the granny stripe blanket by Lucy from Attic 24. I'm using a size G 4.25mm hook, marling Knit Picks Stroll Fingering with, right now, this magic ball of Legacy Fiber Arts half minis. And that iced bun progress keeper is where I was last time I tried to crochet things. So this is over the past like week and a half. I've kind of been taking it like a third of a row to a row at a time, depending on how my hands feel. And let me tell you, it feels so good to have yarn in my hands again. I'm just saying. But I mean, I can't do too much because it does hurt after a while. And it's not really the immediate hurt so much as like a few hours later, my hands will be killing me. So I really gotta monitor that. But it's something. I've also been working on my Lion Brand Scarfy sweater. So last time you saw this, it was 3 swatches, and I decided to go for this swatch. And what I've done is some math. This is what I was talking about, where there's a lot more planning to go into these projects, so it's kind of hard to have something to show you in between episodes. Like, I had this swatch last episode, and now I have a piece of paper with a bunch of scribbles on it and a swatch. So that's not very interesting podcasting. But I wanted to go over it again, that I'm using the Sweater Blank by Renee Callahan from the Craftsy class, Machine Knitting Sweater Basics. And this one I had to do some really interesting math because I'm trying to do the size large with the medium size neck. The size large neck on my yarn crawl sweater is just too long. It's like, or it's too big. It's like this big. So I want to go a little smaller. So I've kind of Frankensteined these together. And she does have a very good schematic with the measurements and like what they are. So I was able to math some things. So hopefully this will work out. The only thing I have to add is I wanted to make the back longer than the front and do a split hem because the back of my yarn crawl sweater is just a little bit too short. Like, it's not uncomfortably short, it's just annoying. And because I'm marl striping these yarns, I don't want to do short rows because it'll be really obvious that I did short rows there. So I'm just gonna do it like 1.5 inches, 2 inches longer in the back and just do a split hem. I gotta remember to add that in to my pattern. What else have I worked on? I started making last weekend, or Monday, because I have Memorial Day off, these dust covers for my knitting machines. Because when I'm in the planning stages, I don't have anything on the knitting machines, and dust is a thing that can be a problem. We generate a lot of dust in this house. It's an old house. Things get dusty really quickly, and I don't want to deal with dust and like knitting machine lubricants. It's not the best time. So, and also part of this is because I had this basket of tote bags that I'd made 1,000,000 years ago out of old Holy jeans and t-shirts, and I haven't used them because tote bags are the easiest thing to come by once you're an adult. It's like as soon as you're an adult, you have way too many tote bags. People just give them to you constantly. Tote bags are everywhere. So I decided the denim would be really great to use as the side that faces down, because for one, it's scrap denim, so I don't care if it gets dirty. And also, if for some reason like there is way too much oil on my knitting machine or too much of a lubricant on my knitting machine, it's not gonna soak through the denim as easily as it would other fabrics. So this is the down-facing side of these dust covers, or they will be once I put them together. I have about 6 of these, and one of them is 4x3. So I should have enough. And if not, I can just put some other fabric on the sides that really aren't going to be very much on the needle bed at all. And what I did is I took a bunch of long strip scraps that I have, and I did the, what's it called? The jelly roll race quilt technique. I didn't do the diagonal seaming to seam them together, but basically that technique is to sew a bunch of strips end to end, fold the whole thing in half, do a seam, cut open the folded edge, fold the whole thing in half, do a seam, cut open the folded edge. So the first one I did was this one, and I love this selvage edge one. I'm gonna do that with all of my fabrics, is cut off like 1.5 inches with the selvage so that I can have scrap things like this, because I love how that looks. So this one I sewed the long edge, so probably 3 times, I think. Is it 6? 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8. It's 8, but I think it was 3 times. Yeah, 2, 4, and then 8. And spray basted it to some scrap batting. I have so much scrap batting. I have a bunch of Frankenstein scrap batting. I put it, one day I just put a bunch of pieces together that seemed to work and made some Frankenstein batting pieces. So that's the first one. This one's probably going to go on my LK150. And then I have 2 for my Brother KH836 because it has that machine and a riverbed. So here's the first one, which I've finished. This is from a jelly roll that all came together. So these all match because they all came from the same jelly roll that I didn't end up using in another project. And this is this one. It hasn't been quilted yet, it's just been spray basted to my Frankenstein batting. Look at that Frankenstein batting. But those should be finished relatively soon. I will probably put in some ribbon to kind of like tie them on, but I haven't quite figured that out yet. I figured I'm just winging it. So just a couple more works in progress to talk about. I did do a little bit of cross stitch, and it's all Joanna's fault. Joanna of Stitching the High Notes, because she started talking about stitching on her podcast again because she settled into a routine after moving, so she was back to crafting again. And so I picked up my Orabesh sampler from a shop called Ad Leones on Etsy, and I did a whole bunch of stuff. I finished the X-Wing in the center there. I love how that turned out. And I did basically everything from this edge onward. Which means the end is in sight. I'm so excited about it. I'm so excited to have this on my wall. I have a few more Star Wars cross-stitch patterns. Definitely 2 more cross-stitch patterns. And then there's a whole bunch of Halloween ones that I want to make, so... Again, the stretches and the hand strengthening exercises have made it so that I can do this for a little while without hurting my hands. I am excited to try the sewing method instead of the poking, because I've always been somebody who pokes the stitches through. But I think the sewing method might be easier on my hands, but we'll see, because this hand is not really the problem. I'm right-handed, so that's the one I do the stitching with. It's usually this hand, so I'm usually holding the frame oddly, which is not great. But I'm very excited to be working on this again. I'm feeling stitching vibes, like everybody else in the universe, apparently. And then the only other thing I have been working on is some free motion quilting practice. I still have a couple of these squares left. So I did some of this. This was playing around with a thread that Craftsy had sent along with an order that I made. So just played around, free motion quilting. And then I was playing around with my free motion quilting foot. I have one plastic one and one metal one, and free motion quilting foots, or embroidery feet, for sewing machines tend to vary, and a lot of them have a bounce, which is not ideal, especially if you're learning, because you can get distracted by the movement. So I modified my plastic one. I basically took the thing apart. I removed the spring, I clipped off the little arm that goes over the thing that you tighten to put the needle in, so that it doesn't bounce, but I was having tensioning problems with it. So I put the metal one on, which is not one that I've really used before. I don't remember if it came with this sewing machine or the previous sewing machine, which was also a Singer machine, but that one works a lot better. It's a lower profile, so when it bounces, it actually does kind of stabilize the quilting. It touches the quilting, in fact, which the other one doesn't do. But the other one might be supposed to be used in conjunction with a plate cover instead of just a 0 stitch length. I don't know, that's a little technical. But anyway, I put on the metal quilting foot, which I like a lot better, and I basically just spent a couple of days when my hands were hurting just practicing curves, just playing around, just trying to get the curves even. I'm still working on getting the stitching even, but at least if the curve is smooth, then your eye forgives a lot. Did a bunch of these. I'm getting better at finding where the edges are supposed to be. Just a lot of practice. Did some echoing, which looks kind of nice. Just playing around with how curves work. I think I have 2 or 3 more squares of those junk squares to play around with. And then I think that Jelly Roll Racing blue quilt top will be one that I play with free motion quilting on as an actual quilt, since that was a scrap quilt. But I'm doing a lot of learning right now, so there's a lot of practice nonsense happening. And speaking of learning, I have swatches to talk about. So last weekend I cleaned out the carriage of my Brother 836E, and I assembled my knitting machine, and I knit a test swatch. This is some of that Northbound Knitting fingering weight yarn that I used for my tablet weaving. So here's the cast on edge. I just did the every other, hung the comb, went to town, and I went through a bunch of the different stitch styles. After I did the first few rows, which I did at a 5, I think, I just kind of go middle to start with. I went down to a 2 apparently on fingering weight yarn. Did a bunch of rows, went up to a 3, and then just kept going up by whole number just to get an idea of what the fabric will be like. So this last section is a 10, which is the largest setting. I will probably also do something similar in a lace weight yarn once I have lace weight scraps to play with, because I do have lace weight projects coming up. And it worked perfectly. The only blip is I wasn't paying attention to the yarn coming through the yarn feeder, and there was just a twisted up knot. So that's the only blip. No dropped stitches. Once I got it cast on, it was good to go. It ran smoothly. Stockinette was a dream. Right now I just have the main bed set up. I want to play around a little bit with the punch cards, get a couple of test swatches for tucking, slip stitching, doing some short rows, just so I can get used to using this machine, because the buttons and levers are all different, and there's the punch card element that I want to play with. But I think once I get a couple of those swatches sorted out, I will hook up my ribber and test ribbing. So that's preliminary swatch, which is great. I also did a fabric swatch project. If you've been watching for a long time, you know that I'm interested in sewing button-down shirts for myself. I'm interested in sewing in general, but I do need lighter weight but dark fabric, long sleeve button-down shirts for the summer for work. Because those shirts, like, I'm nearing when they start wearing out for my work shirts, and I want to have some casual shirts too, but I don't always know what fabric I'm using. I'm new to this. Like, I know quilting cottons, I know jersey fabric, and that's kind of the only thing that I'm sure about. So what I did is I went to fabric.com and did a little Googling on the side for the best shirting fabrics for men's shirts, what types of fabrics are good, and what qualities they have. And then I went into fabric.com and I found an example of a bunch of different shirting fabrics, or apparel fabrics, mostly shirting, but a couple of other apparel fabrics just because I was curious as to what they were like. And bought swatches. And I did this because they would come labeled. Swatches are $3 on fabric.com, which is a lot if I'm honest, just because I can go to Joann's and get fat quarters or like offcuts for cheaper than that. But I wanted them to be labeled, and I wanted them to be... I didn't want to get lost in a Joann's trying to figure things out. Like, while they're on the website, they're all right in front of me, and I can look and make choices, so I'm not freaking out in the store about how things work. So I bought a bunch of fabrics, like this one. They come in square swatches. I cut the swatch in half, and I washed one half of it. So the part with the labels is unwashed, and this is just a cotton. This one's marketed as, I don't know, more of a shirting cotton than a quilting cotton, but honestly it doesn't feel any different to me. And then this is the part I washed and then pressed and then tied them together. So I have exactly what the fabric was and how it feels after it's washed. So that's a basic cotton. Sorry, my show notes came out. My tablet fell asleep. This is a chambray. And I picked fabrics that I might want to buy. So here's a chambray, which is a twill fabric, based on the weaving structure. But Here's the swatch, cut it in half. Here it is washed. Like, now I know this is pretty wrinkly, but it would be good for a casual shirt, not necessarily a work shirt. But I also didn't press any of these right away. I kind of pressed them a few days later. That was the Rustica chambray. This is another chambray. But this is a smaller weave. And you can see this one kind of shrunk a bunch. Oh, I didn't put them together the right way. But the darker little blips came out to stand out a little more. But that's a good fabric to use. Let's see, this one's a gauze. I was just curious about the fabric. Not really a men's shirt fabric. I got one of these plaids. I don't think this one was marked as a flannel plaid, but it's closer to a flannel than it is to, like, cotton. So that's good to know. I'm out of focus. Why? There we go. Which one was this? This is a seersucker. So, unwashed and then washed. And I like this fabric. I like how it feels once it's washed. They usually come in light colors though. I don't like wearing light colors. This one was labeled as a rustic woven shirting fabric. I like this one too. And then this one surprised me. This one is a linen. It's so thin. Like, there's nothing to it. And it does tighten up a little when you wash it, but not by much. I was very surprised by that. And then this is a plaid cotton that's aimed a little bit more at shirting than the black cotton was. So that's interesting. And something that I think I'd recommend if you don't know what fabrics to start with and you have an idea but you're not entirely sure, before you buy 2 or 3 yards of something, to get a $3 swatch or see if you can get an offcut of the same fabric or a similar type of fabric, and then just, here's how it feels before it's washed, here's how it feels after it's washed, what does it look like after you iron it, that kind of thing. And that's it for swatches. I did get 2 new things since my last episode. I did buy a tilt stand for my Brother knitting machine. I talked about it in the last podcast episode. I rearranged my craft room and that table is back against the wall again. And I think that was a really good idea. It's also down off of the risers because I was hurting my back knitting on that machine because of the way I was leaning. So if I'm in the chair, it's easier to control my posture so I don't hurt myself. So I bought a tilt stand for my knitting machine, and it's a metal frame that you clamp your machine to, and it tilts so that when you have the ribber attached, you can have it the way it's supposed to be to use the ribber, or tilt it forwards to use just the main bed so it's not so tilted because of the way they attach to each other. Yeah, it's a good addition to the craft room. It's sitting perpendicular to my other knitting machine table, And the stand is like small enough that I can easily move it out of the way if I need to. I mean, it's a little heavy because it's a big metal stand with a big metal knitting machine on top, but it doesn't look like it's in the way. It doesn't look like it's taking up all the room ever. And it's fairly easy to just like scoop it up and kind of shift it where I need to. When I'm using the machine, like when I was knitting the swatch, it does have to come out kind of more towards the center of the room because of the rails that stick out. Otherwise I kind of run the carriage into the other knitting machine table. But then when I'm done using the machine, I can take the rails off, put them in the lid, and just kind of shuffle it back out of walking way. So that's good. And then, because May the 4th happened, Mustache Yarns does a Star Wars self-striping yarn pre-order for May the 4th, and I missed out on the Last Jedi colorway, so I bought the Last Jedi colorway. And then, because Solo came out last weekend, there was a Lando colorway. Of course I had to get Lando. So, more Star Wars self-striping yarn. Apparently I can't help myself. And I've got more knitting machine purchases coming, but they're not here, so I'm not going to talk about them. So let's move on to other stuff. Stuff that I am watching. I did start watching Jessica Jones Season 2. I don't know if I talked about it last episode. I don't know why I've been waiting so long. Probably because I can't knit. So it's hard to watch things and pay attention to them. But yeah, I'm slowly watching Jessica Jones Season 2. I kind of lost my momentum, but that's because I get distracted easily. And then I went to go see Deadpool 2, which I really, really enjoyed. And I went to go see Solo, of course, which I really, really enjoyed. Based on a first viewing, I need to see it a few more times, but a first viewing, I think it's the best. I think it's better than The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. It and Rogue One are just kind of like teetering at the edge of which one is my favorite of the newest movies. So I really enjoyed it. Stuff I'm listening to a lot because headphones at work again is brilliant. So I finished listening to Dark Force Rising, which is book 2 of the Thrawn trilogy by Timothy Zahn, narrated by Mark Thompson, and that's a re-listen. And I'm nearly done with The Last Command, which is book 3 of the Thrawn trilogy by Timothy Zahn, narrated by Mark Thompson. Another re-listen. And then I've been listening to a bunch of podcasts. I kind of went through the Pacific Northwest Stories like catalog. I do listen to the Black Tapes, which is a really, really good horror podcast. They're kind of documentary horror podcasts. So then I listened to Tanis, which is another podcast by the same folks. And I used the blurb from the first episode because I think it's the best out of the blurbs on their site. I don't know why their summaries are so weird, but in the first episode of Tanis, our host, Nick Silver, wonders if the internet age might contain one last great mystery, an ancient myth known as Tanis. His exploration into the enigmatic Tanis begins by asking the seemingly simple question, what is it? The answers, he soon discovers, are far more complicated. It's really compelling, and I love the atmosphere of sound in their podcasts. It's really fantastic at that. And then I listened to The Last Movie, which is another podcast by the same folks. Tanis podcast host Nick Silver and regular contributor MK explore the possible existence of The Last Movie, an infamous underground feature film reputed to drive you insane. Legend has it that every screening of this film was surrounded by bloodshed and controversy. One reviewer actually described slipping on blood in the aisle as he ran through dozens of people trying to tear him apart. This is a shorter podcast. It's a 6-episode series. But if you're curious about this studio's kind of podcast style, I think it's a good one to just quickly listen through, to get an idea of it. It's really good. And then I listened to their other podcast, Rabbits. When Carly Parker's friend Yumiko goes missing under very mysterious circumstances, Carly's search for her friend leads her headfirst into an ancient mysterious game known only as Rabbits. Soon Carly begins to suspect that Rabbits is much more than just a game, and that the key to understanding Rabbits might be the key to survival of our species and the universe as we know it. This one sounds like it's complete. The last episode I listened to sounded pretty final. So it might also be a finished podcast series, but I really enjoyed it. And I kind of really enjoyed listening to these 3 podcasts back to back, just kind of immersing myself in the same soundscape. So that was really good. And then I've been listening to a bunch of other podcasts. The 3 I'm going to talk about are ones where I am caught up to present. There's some that I'm kind of trying out, and I'm a few episodes in. I haven't decided whether I'm going to keep listening or not. But these 3 are definitely in my feed for good for now. The first one is Mars Corp. Mars Corp is a 12-part scripted comedy podcast about station supervisor E.L. Hobbs' first year at Mars Corp, a terraforming colony established on the Red Planet in 2070. There's more on the feed than just the 12 episodes. There's a bunch of shorter episodes and character episodes following it. I think they're gearing up for season 2. But this is a really funny podcast. It's a comedy, and E.L. Hobb is one of only 2 Earthlings in the entire Mars colony. Everybody else is a Martian. They've been Martians for generations because there was a mishap with the cryotubes. And the Martians are hilariously incompetent, and it's very, very funny to listen to Hobb try to wrangle these Martians into something vaguely functioning so they don't just die. It's a really funny podcast, and it's primarily British folks, so it's British dark humor in a Mars colony. It's super great. And then I listened to Girl in Space. Abandoned on a dying ship in the farthest reaches of known space, a young scientist fights for survival and patience with the onboard AI. Who is she? No one knows, but a lot of dangerous entities really want to find out. Listen bi-weekly as the story unfolds for science, guns, trust, antimatter, truth, beauty, inner turmoil, and delicious cheeses. It's all here, in space. This one's really good. This one's told first-person style. It's the girl's kind of diary or log. She's the only person on this ship, the only organic person on this ship. It's her and an AI. And it's one of those things where you slowly find out more things about her as she records her thoughts, just doing her daily life, and then the upheaval when these other entities try to kind of take over her life. So that's really good. And it's a relatively short one. I think it only started last year. So it's easy to catch up on that one. And then I just finished Marsfall. It's another Mars colony one. I like Mars colony podcasts, apparently. Marsfall follows some of the earliest colonists to settle on Mars in the year 2047, and each episode continues the story from a different character's perspective. Led by their fearless commander, Jackie Orania, and assisted by the Colonial Artificial Intelligence Unit, Andy, they strive to make a home on the Red Planet while exploring its deeper mysteries. Balancing tension and humor, this sci-fi audio drama reinvents the radio play for the 21st century. This one is really good. You get a lot of different perspectives, and it's it's a serious podcast. There is humor, but it's audio drama. But again, if you're a sci-fi fan, it's a good one to pick up. And then stuff I'm reading. I started and finished a book within 3 days, which I've not done in a very long time. This book was called Humans Wanted, and it's edited by Vivian Case, I think is how you pronounce that. It's a short story anthology, kind of based around the like Tumblr meme that humans are space orcs, or humans are from space Australia and aliens are baffled by our ability to survive. Here's the blurb from the book summary. Humans are tough. Humans can last days without food. Humans heal so quickly they pierce holes in themselves or inject ink under their epidermis for fun. Humans will walk for days on broken bones in order to make it to safety. Humans will literally cut off bits of themselves if trapped by a disaster. You would be amazed what humans will do to survive, or to ensure the survival of others they feel responsible for. That's the other thing. Humans pack bond, and they spill their pack bonding instincts everywhere. Sure, it's weird when they talk sympathetically to broken spaceships, or try to pet every life form that scans as non-toxic. It's even a little weird that just existing in the same space as them for long enough seems to make them care about you, but if you're hurt, if you're trapped, if you need someone to fetch help, you really want a human. 12 authors provide their perspectives on human ingenuity and usefulness as we try to find our place among the stars. From battle-tested to broken-hearted, humans are capable of amazing things. Humans Wanted shows not only what we are, but how awesome we can be. It is an incredibly uplifting series of stories, and I think that's something that a lot of us have needed in the recent few years. It's absolutely fantastic. Many of these stories are told from the point of view of aliens, so a lot of them are like, what is this human doing? And like, even as you're reading it, you're like, no, yeah, that's totally reasonable. We're baffling creatures, and to see a reflection of how good and tenacious we can be is really kind of uplifting and amazing. This is a digital book that I picked up on Amazon. I don't know if it's available elsewhere, but a quick Google search, or a quick whatever you like search, should give you some options if Amazon is not your jam. And then I reread Eschlesha by Jer Keane, which is a book that I talked about before. I did read the digital version after some weird snafu with my Kindle. For some reason, the digital version didn't want to download to my Kindle because Amazon is futzing around with the book, because Jer Keane has two versions of the book. She has a PG-13 version and the original version, which is like an R. So the PG-13 version of the book is the book with the red and black cover. The original version is the one with the white and gray cover, with Rex and Ambrose on the cover. So it didn't work. I went to the help desk for Amazon, and they refunded me my order, even though I bought it years ago, like 2 years ago now, since it's come out, so that I could rebuy it and download it. But when you search Eschlesha on Amazon, it only comes up with the PG-13 version. You can only get the original version, like, by a direct link. It's very weird. So now I have both versions, because I didn't realize that's what was happening. But if you're looking for the original version, if you search in Google for Eschlesha by Jer Keane, you can get to her kind of author's Tumblr page, and it's like the first or second post the link to get to the original version to download on Amazon. I think you can buy the digital copies elsewhere, but I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, right after Humans Wanted, I just like tore through Ashlusha for the second time. Because it's a really good book. And I do follow her fandom Tumblr, and she's talked about that she's working on the next book, which is very exciting. And theoretically is coming out later this year, so I'm very excited about that. So I've got 2 fics to talk to you guys about this time. I've been reading a lot of fic, but 2 that I'm going to talk about to not have this take 50 million years. So the first one is called From Ashes by Cadis12, or Cadis12. And the summary is, when Draco comes back for 8th year, he starts an unexpected friendship with Hermione Granger. Between his new friendship and his parents kicking him out of the house, Draco's life starts down a new path. This one is a long one, but it's a really, really good one. It really kind of wrenches Draco Malfoy out of the environment that he was in. They basically, his parents basically send him a bag of gold and is like, you're done, goodbye, we're moving to France and we don't ever want to talk to you again because you're making choices that we don't like. So he is on his own, and it really forces him to evaluate what's important to him, where he wants his future to go, and how to, what's the word I'm thinking of? How to redeem himself with his peers and the people that he's going to be interacting with that he may have hurt personally in the past because of being a Death Eater. It's really, really good. It features him going into a healer career, and Hermione goes into a healer career in this book, or in this fic as well. And later there is romance between Draco Malfoy and Harry Potter, which is a pairing that I'm only now kind of getting into now that the fandom's kind of matured. It was a pairing that I hated when I first read the books, but finding the good stuff now, after it's percolated for 20 years or whatever it's been. So that one is really good. And there's a lot of writing of personal interactions that feel very, like, natural. Sometimes getting characters who don't normally interact to interact feels a little forced, but it just felt like a natural progression from the first sentence on through the fic. It's very good. And then the other fic I want to recommend is Secrets by Bora Biza, and then in parentheses it says Biza, so I guess that's a nickname that is used on Archive of Our Own for this writer. And the summary is, beginning with Draco's unexpected arrival at the Dursleys, Harry's summer after 6th year becomes filled with activity and many secrets. As his summer progresses, Harry generates several unexpected allies as he finds himself actively becoming the leader of the light side. So this is a post-Half-Blood Prince alternate universe. This also does feature Harry Potter and Draco Malfoy as a romantic couple, but it's a slow build for this fic. It's very long, and this fic is one of those ones where if you say it out loud, it sounds ridiculous, but it just kind of hooks you in. There's like an illegitimate unknown child, there's there's multiple people crammed into Harry's small bedroom at the Dursleys, hidden. It's like halfway redeemed Petunia Dursley. Harry secretly running like 6 branches of the light side without letting them interact so that nobody has all the secrets but him, so that nobody's compromised if Voldemort gets a hand on anybody. It's incredible. And the whole fic takes place over like the 3 months of the summer between 6th year and 7th year. Like, a book length in that amount of time. It's pretty amazing. But that's going to do it for this episode. Show notes and everything can be found at freakishlemon.com or freakishlemonpodcast.com. Come join the Ravelry group. Just search Freakish Lemon in the groups tab and you will find us. You can follow me as Freakish Lemon at Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, or Ravelry. All the fun places. And all the links to those things will be in the down bar here on YouTube or somewhere around here if you're watching this somewhere else. And if you are watching this on YouTube, consider hitting that subscribe button so you can find out when I'm posting more videos, especially now that I'm going monthly. They're going to be less frequent. So, something to consider. And that's going to do it. I just heard Gabby from the Once Upon a Quirky podcast, who's my sister, just drop off the dogs. So, I need to end this. So, goodbye.